What's going on, guys? This is Greg, and you're watching part 5 of the Nuclear Attack Survival Skills series. And today I'm going to talk to you guys about how you can shield yourself from a nuclear blast and from nuclear radiation. So the first thing I want to do is I want to just go over some of the main principles that you're gonna need to know before we get into building shelters and protecting yourself. If you look at part 2 of the series, I talk about important concepts that you need to know, and I discuss the inverse square law and the 7-10 rule, which goes for distance and time. So basically what the inverse square law and the 7-10 rule, that's for the distance and time. And now we're going to talk about the shielding. And so there's basically 3 things that you're going to want to know to survive a radiation emergency or nuclear, especially radiation. There's 3 things that you're gonna want, and that's gonna be distance, time, and shielding. Those are the 3 things that are gonna be your friends when you're dealing with a nuclear radiation emergency. So we went over the inverse square law in part 2 of the important concepts video. Distance. We went over the 7-10 rule. And now I'm going to talk to you guys more about the shielding and the halving thicknesses. So basically with shielding, the way it works is that there's something what's known as a halving thickness, and that's the thickness that's required to reduce radiation in half. Every material has a different halving thickness depending on typically the mass and density of the material. But the good news is that scientists discovered exactly what the thickness is. So more or less we know how much is required to reduce radiation to a acceptable level. Most fallout shelters are constructed to be at least have 10 halving thicknesses, which reduces the nuclear radiation to 1/1000th of what is outside of the shielding. So what your goal is to do, your goal when you're building a shelter, is you want to have enough shielding, enough material to reduce the radiation by 1/1000th of what is outside. And the way to do that is to have 10 halving thicknesses. So for example, I'm gonna go, let's see, so we'll go right now, we'll look at the halving thicknesses. I'll talk to you about the halving thicknesses right now. So let's say your halving thickness for lead is 0.4 inches. So if you want to reduce it to 10 halving thicknesses, which will reduce radiation to 1/1000th of what is outside, which basically, you're reducing the radiation by like 90%, To do that, you're going to need 4 inches of lead. You're going to need 10 inches of steel. You're going to need 2 feet of concrete. You're going to need 3 feet of packed dirt. You're going to need 6 feet of water. And you're going to need about 9.2 feet or 110 inches of wood. Alright, so that's what you're going to want to strive to get, those numbers. I'm going to write it down for you on the big board in a second. So 4 inches of lead, 10 inches of steel, 2 feet of concrete, 3 feet of packed dirt, 6 feet of water, and 9 feet of wood. But, so just remember, the most important thing here is going to be the dirt and the concrete and the lead and steel. I wouldn't worry too much about water because you're not going to really, although, if you have water surrounding you, like, if some way, like, if you're in an aquarium or something, I guess that, you could use the water from the aquarium to shield it. But I'm going to write this down on the big board so you guys can see it better. So basically just know that in order, your ideal level that you want to get to is you want to get to 10 halving thicknesses, which is going to reduce the radiation to 1/1000th of what is outside. And that's basically going to That's going to reduce the radiation by 90%. So it's going to be very good for you. It's going to be very safe. Now, in order to do that, it's not going to be easy. You're going to need a lot of material, and it's going to take a lot of work, and you may have a limited amount of time before the fallout comes. So, or if you're closer to the detonation point, you're not going to have, there's not going to be a time, because the radiation will be very high right where it detonates. And let's say, like, a mile up to 5 miles or outside of the detonation point for most nuclear weapons, that's where you're going to have a very high dose, and you're really not going to have much time to build anything or to make yourself a nice shelter. So in those cases, you're going to have to improvise and use your environment. You're not going to have much time. So what I'm going to do now is, we'll get back to the halving thicknesses later on, but just want to go back over with the inverse square law, and I'm going to talk about some concepts when you're choosing your shelters, some basic concepts that you want to know. So the reason why these things are important, especially the distance, so like when you're choosing a shelter, you always want to put the most distance between you and the radiation source. And so, like, when you're picking a shelter, let's say, like, you got to find a shelter, you want to generally be in the basement of a building or underground. And the reason for that is, if you're in the basement of a building, you have the floors above you. If, let's say, you're in a house and you have like 2 stories above you, when the fallout lands on the roof, you're going to have two floors of distance between the fallout, which is going to be on your roof. It's going to be on the roof of your house, and you're going to have 2 floors of air and wood and different materials that are going to, and also just distance that's going to allow the radiation to spread out, and it's going to be not as strong by the time the rays get towards your basement. So you generally want to be either underground, or you want to be in the basement of a building, because the basement puts distance between you and the fallout, because the fallout is going to land on the roof. So when you're in the basement, you're going to have more distance between it. You're also going to have some shielding as well. You're going to have a little bit of shielding, because let's say, like, if you're in like a 4-story building and the fallout lands on the top story, you're going to have 4 floors that the radiation is going to have to pass through before it hits you. And there's going to be, there's going to be materials in the way, so it's going to reduce the radiation through shielding that way. However, it doesn't, just because you're in the basement doesn't mean you're not subjected to radiation, because, the radiation is still going to fall on the ground next to the basement and at the ground level. So the fallout, let's say if, like, this is a building right here, this is the roof, the fallout's going to land on the roof, and if you're in the basement somewhere over here, you're in the basement, so you're going to be protected from the fallout on the roof, but then the fallout that's going to come down and land at the ground level is still going to be, there's going to be a danger there, because it could pass through the wall, and it can also pass through the dirt a little bit, but mostly it's going to pass through the walls that are around the bottom of the building, or if there's any kind of windows. So the deeper that you can get underground, the better you are, because you're going to have more dirt that's going to protect you from the fallout that's on the ground level. It's going to have to pass through more dirt and more concrete to get to you. So just keep that in mind. And then also, time is important when you're thinking about like a fallout shelter or any type of radiation shelter, because you're going to want to know the 7-10 rule. And the 7-10 rule, I talked about it in part 2. Basically what that means is, for every factor of 7 that you increase the time, the radiation decreases by a factor of 10. So let's say, like, a bomb went off right now and it released radiation. The radiation 7 hours from now is going to be 10 times weaker. And then 49 hours from now, it's going to be 100 times weaker. And then 2 weeks from now, it's going to be 1,000 times weaker. So you just want to remember that time is key. You're going to want to be able to weather the storm, so to speak. You're going to want to be able to hunker down and stay in your shelter area for at least 2 days, preferably 2 weeks. 2 weeks, you're not going to want to really leave until you hit the 2-week mark. But you know, if let's say you have to go out and get food or get water from your nearby area, you may be able to do that. But for the first 2 days, you want to stay inside, especially if you're close to where the blast was, because close to where the blast was is where the radiation is going to be extremely high, and likely you're not gonna, you're going to take a fatal dose, you know. But if you're like far away from the blast and you're just dealing with fallout, the fallout is generally not going to be as high of as a radiation level as where the detonation was, you know, and the fallout degrades quickly because there's not a lot of mass. The radiation degrades quickly. So within a week, within 2 weeks, the radiation is going to be almost completely gone, you know. So just remember that, you know, try to stay in your shelter for at least 2 days. And then if you have to go out after that to get water and supplies, you're going to want to do that on a limited basis. You're not going to want to like travel far. You know, you may want to just go into your house and get food and water and then bring it back down into your basement and where you have your shelter made. And you're going to want to stay there for at least another few days to 2 weeks, you know. After 2 weeks, it should generally be safe to come back out. But again, you're going to want to have some type of radiation detection device, and I'm going to go over that in the next video. In part 6, I'm going to talk about essential gear and essential things that you need to survive a nuclear attack or a nuclear emergency. I'm going to go over different pieces of gear that you're going to want. And one of the things you're going to want is you're going to want a way to detect radiation, and you're going to want a way to measure your dose. You know, you're going to need a way to measure the dose, your accumulated dose that you're getting. So this way you can see how much radiation you're accumulating in your body. But we'll talk about that in the next part. So just remember these 3 things: distance, time, and shielding. Those are your friends, you know. Distance, time, and shielding, all right? So now I'm going to go into specific details of what type of shelters, what type of shelters you're going to want to make and what kind of shelters you can find, especially like if you're in an urban area. Let's say like you work in Manhattan or a big city. You know, you're not going to really, you know, unless you have like a bunker that, you know, you've made or something, or you know where there's a fallout shelter and you have access to the fallout shelter, you're generally going to have to make use of what's available to you in the environment, you know. You're not going to really have much time to build anything, especially because New York City is a nuclear target because it's a large population center. It's a culturally significant, and it's also has a financial district in it as well. So New York City is a big target, you know. So let's, for example, say that you work in Manhattan, and you know you're in your office, you're on your lunch break, and you're watching TV. You know, you're watching news about the latest, you know, political stuff about the Alabama election, because right now there's that Alabama election where the Democrat won. You know, and you're watching all these pundits going back and forth and arguing about it, and then all of a sudden you hear a noise, beep, beep. You hear the emergency alert system coming on the TV, and it's saying that, you know, North Korea is launching that the United States has detected the launch of a missile, and it's heading towards New York City, and it's believed that it's going to arrive in let's say 45 minutes. You know, so you only have 45 minutes until the bomb is going to impact. It's really 45 minutes is not that much time, you know. So you're going to have to find a way to get shelter from the blast and from the thermal radiation, because those are going to be your 2 immediate threats. You know, the nuclear radiation is bad as well, but you know, you can't stand to face the nuclear radiation if you're destroyed by the blast or if you're burned alive. So you're going to want to find a shelter that will help you survive the blast and the thermal radiation. That's going to be your main priority. And so let's see. So obviously, if the emergency alert system comes on, you're going to want to try to, if you think that you can get away from the downtown area, you know, obviously that's going to be tough in something like New York City where there's a lot of traffic. You know, you can't really move more than like, you know, you can walk faster than you drive because there's so many lights and there's traffic, so you're not going to really get that far in New York City. But It really depends on what part of the city you're in. You know, if you're kind of more on the outskirts of the city, it may be you may be able to get in your car and drive like 5 or 10 miles away. You know, in like 15 or 30 minutes, you can cover, you know, a good amount of distance with your car. You know, you can cover like 5 or 10 miles. That's going to make your survival chances much better than if you're, let's say, closer to the downtown area, which is the likely target, you know. And they're not going to strike the suburbs. They're most likely going to strike the core of the city, or any type of military target or strategic target. They're going after that. They're not going after the outlying areas. So if you're kind of like more on the outskirts of the city, or maybe, you know, there's just a way for you to get away from the city. You know, maybe you're close to like a highway that's generally not gets a lot of traffic, and you can quickly hop on the highway, and you know, in 30 minutes you can cover like, you know, you can cover a good 10-15 miles. That's going to put you in a much better position, you know, because you're going to be further away from the target, you know, the X, you know, like a X is a target. You're going to want to get away from the X, you know. So just use your common sense, use your brain, think about what's the target, you know. If there's a missile heading for New York, you know, chances are the target's going to be Manhattan. It's going to be downtown Manhattan, lower Manhattan, where you have the stock market, where you have, you know, the World Trade Center, where you have the UN building. You know, you have the Statue of Liberty. You have a lot of culturally significant things there. You know, same thing with Washington, D.C. You know, if you're in D.C., you know, your targets are going to generally be the White House, the Capitol building, you know, the Pentagon, you know, maybe some of the intelligence agency buildings. So you're going to want to get away from those likely targets. You're going to want to move away. You know, if you can run away, if you're a good runner, you know, in 30 minutes you may be able to cover a few miles, depending on how good of a runner you are. If you have an adrenaline rush, you may be able to put a mile, even 2 miles away. That's going to increase your odds of survival. You know, as long as you can find shelter, you know, you don't want to just start running and then you're going to get caught out in the open, you know. So you definitely don't want to do that. But if you're like, let's say you're on a walk and you're right next to the White House, you know, you're walking around downtown DC, or you're walking around New York City and you're right next to the White House, and all of a sudden you get a message that there's a missile incoming and it's going to hit in 45 minutes, you know, you're going to want to try to get away from that target as fast as possible. And then once you get away, you put some distance away from that target, you're going to want to look for a shelter. Now, the good thing is in a city, there's a lot of shelter of opportunities that a lot of people overlook. That's, you know, the standing right on top of them, and that's your sewer systems, your storm drains, your access tunnels to utility lines. Those are all underground, and many times they're like several feet underground. So you can literally just lift up like a manhole cover, or, you know, get access to some of those underground tunnel systems, and it's literally like a whole nother world under there. Some of those, like especially in New York City, they have really deep, you know, like sewer systems and access tunnels, and they're really deep, and there's a lot of, remember what I talked about? I talked about the shielding and the distance. You know, if you're several feet underground, you know, you have like 4, 5, 6, 7 feet of soil between the ground level and you know, let's say you're underground like 5 feet and you have several feet of soil on top of you, you're in good shape. You know, you don't have to worry about really anything, except food and water, you know, and possibly some fallout leaking in through the manhole covers. So I'm just going to go over this list that I made of, you know, some good shelters that you can find in a city environment. So if you're in a city, you know, so you know, generally you're going to want to be in basements or underground, or you're going to want to take some type of cover that's going to shield you from the blast and the heat. So if you can't find a basement, or if you're somehow caught out in like an open area and there's no buildings around, or they're all locked, or you just can't get access to them, you know, you're going to want to dig a trench, you know, or you're going to want to find some type of area that's below grade, you know, like a canal, you know, like a drainage canal, or like a ditch on the side of the road, you know, anything that's below ground level, so it shields you from the pressure and from the heat, you know. So think about something like that. You can also find a culvert. A culvert, you know, those tubes that go under roads to divert water. You can try to go into a culvert. A culvert is actually really good, especially if it's like, you know, several feet underneath the road. You know, you're gonna have you know, a lot of dirt above you. So you know, you can really, that'll give you some good shielding from the blast. But here's some lists, some ideas. You can go into a bank vault. You can go into the basement of a bank. Basements of banks are usually very well made. There's usually a lot of vaults in them. There's usually not a lot of windows. There's usually reinforced concrete. They're very thick. You know, so if you can get into a bank vault or the basement of a bank, that's really good. Cellars, any type of a cellar is good. Any type of basement from a multi-story building, especially older buildings that were built like in the 50s. You know, they were built with nuclear war in mind because that was the Cold War, you know. So, but any type of apartment building or office building, they're going to have a very solid foundation. It's going to have several feet of concrete that are very thick, and it's usually deep underground. So that's going to protect you from the blast. It's going to protect you from the heat, and it's going to protect you from the radiation as well. Underground parking garages are also good. You know, they're very thick. They have a lot of concrete, you know, and they're underground, so they'll protect you from the blast. Culverts, canals, and ditches, I talked about that. Subways are very good. And as well as, you know, sometimes in subways or in underground trains, there's like little access tunnels that the rails, you know, the rail companies or the agencies, they make like, you know, access tunnels for the workers. So if they want to access like the third rail and the electrical system for the train, there's, you know, there's all types of maintenance tunnels inside of a subway. So you can get into one of those maintenance tunnels and you're going to be in very good shape. But even just being in the subway is good because the subway is underground. You know, it's very deep underground, so it's going to protect you from the blast and from the heat, and also the radiation. Let's see. And if you can't get into a basement, and if you're in a building and you can't get access to the basement for whatever reason, you can go into the interior of the building. You want to go as much inside and on the bottom. You want to get as low to the building and as inside as you can. So that's what you're going to want to do. Let's see. So you could dig a trench, go into a manhole. So that's basically it. So that's if you're close to the detonation point. And then if you want to deal with fallout, for dealing with fallout, you're going to want to move into an underground structure like a basement or tunnel, and you're not going to want to be out in the open. So yeah, I mean, that's common sense. You don't want to be caught out in the open. So like one of the mistakes that people are probably going to make if there's a nuclear attack is they're going to think that they can outrun the fallout. They're going to try to get in their car and they're going to try to drive away. And that's not necessarily good because the fallout may start to fall as they're driving, and they're not going to have a suitable shelter, and then they're going to be stuck out in the open and they're going to take a very high dose of radiation. You know, so you're going to want to just immediately think about building a shelter. You don't even think about evacuating because you're not going to have time in most cases unless you're very far away. You know, if you're like over 100 miles or 200-300 miles away, then you may have a chance to evacuate. But if you're within 50 miles or 100 miles, you know, you're not going to have time to evacuate. The fallout's going to start falling and you're going to be caught out in the open, and the fallout's just going to poison you. You know, it's going to get on your skin. You're going to breathe it in. So you don't want to be in that situation. You know, so it's going to take a few hours. It's going to take up to a few hours or a few days for the fallout to arrive, based on how far you are from the detonation point and on weather. So if you're building a shelter, you're going to want to consider these halving thicknesses. But generally, you're going to want to go into the corner of your basement or underground structure furthest away from any windows, doors, or open areas. The reason you want to go into the corner is because that's where you're going to be surrounded by the most concrete and dirt, and you're going to have some protection on the sides. So then all you're going to have to do is just box yourself in, you know, because let's say you're in the corner. If you have like a wall here, and then a wall behind you, all you got to do is just build a wall of dense material in front of you to block the radiation in front. So that's what you're going to want to do, and you're going to want to be as far away from any type of windows, doors, or any type of open areas. Like if you're in a parking garage, like an underground parking garage, you have the open area where the cars drive out. You're going to want to be as far away from that as possible. Maybe if you could find like some type of a closet that you can get into, and then fortify it with some material, you know. So let's see. So once you get into your basement or your underground area, you're going to want to build like a shelter for yourself, and you're going to want to use, you know, those, like I was talking about, those halving thicknesses. You're going to want to use as much material as possible. So like to get the radiation down 90%, you're going to want to use at least like 9 feet of wood, or 6 feet of water, or 3 feet of dirt, or 2 feet of concrete, or 10 inches of steel, or 4 inches of lead. And so basically, you know, typically you like books are very good. If you have books, if you have furniture, if you have scrap wood, cinder blocks, sandbags, just straight up dirt. If you have dirt, you know, a shovel, you're going to want to shovel. Like if you're in your basement of your house, you're going to want to take a shovel and you're going to want to bury, if you have like basement windows, you're going to want to bury your windows with like 3 feet of packed dirt on the outside. You know, this way it'll block the radiation from getting in. Let's see, what else? Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you my basement here, and I'm going to try to explain to you what I'm talking about. So just hang on a minute. Alright guys, so I'm in my basement here, so I'm just going to use this as an example. If I was searching for a shelter here, my ideal location would probably be right here where I'm looking at. In one of these corners here, this is where I'm going to want to build my shelter, probably right here where this oil tank is. And you see these little basement windows here right above me. This little window here. You know, I'm going to probably want to build my shelter right in there, right where that oil tank is, and that blue vacuum, central vac tube. I'm going to want to build a shelter in this corner, or this corner. This is another candidate right here, because see here, there's no windows here. There's all concrete here. All right, and this is all dirt. And this corner is pretty good as well. The only thing is I have a window right above me, see? So if I wanted to go in this corner, it's not going to be as good because I got the window there. But see, these windows, let me step back a little. What I can do with these windows, and that's what I was talking about, is you're going to want to take dirt from outside. You're going to want to go outside, take a shovel, and you're going to want to literally bury the windows with like 3 feet of dirt, and you're going to want to pack it in as you're burying it. You're going to want to step on it and pack it in, you know. So you're going to want at least 3 feet of packed dirt on top of those windows, and that's going to keep the radiation from penetrating through the glass, because the glass is not going to really help you that much. You know, so that's a good opportunity. And you know, basically what I would do is let's say I knew that there was a bomb coming. You know, what I would do is I would go upstairs. You know, I knew that, let's say, you know, I live like, you know, New York City is not too far away from me. You know, I'm probably about 60 miles from New York City. So if, let's say, there was a bomb in New York City, what I would do is, you know, I would go upstairs, I would get all the food and all the water that I could, and I would put it in this corner here. Maybe I would bring a mattress in here. So if I want to sleep, some blankets, you know, because it's chilly, a little chilly down here maybe. You know, but food and water. Water is going to be more important than food. You're going to want to bring a lot of water. You know, you're going to want at least 1 gallon of water per day. So you're going to want at least like, you know, you're going to want at least 5 to 10 gallons of water in here. And then you're going to want to bring food, you know. and something that you can lay on, because it's not going to be comfortable to lay on the ground for, 5 days or something. You're going to have to sleep. So bring a mattress, like your bed mattress, bring it down into the basement. All right, and then bring some blankets. Bring your toothbrush, hygiene things. So if you want to, clean yourself, maybe bring like some first aid items, like rubbing alcohol, some gauze pads, toothbrush, basic stuff like that. So you can do some basic hygiene while you're in your shelter. And then what I'm going to want to do after I deal with this window here, I'm going to fill that up with dirt. I'm going to cover it up with like 3 or 4 feet of dirt from outside. And then what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to bring my water down here, 5 to 10 gallons of water. As you see, I got empty water gallons here. I can fill those up, no problem. Those are just, those have distilled water in them. So all I got to do is just fill those water containers up, bring food down here, and then I'm going to want to seal this area off. I'm going to want to build a shelter, literally like a shelter. And what I'm going to do is for the structure of it, I'm going to use dressers. I have dressers upstairs and shelves. That's going to be my frame. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put books inside of them. And then I'm going to put any kind of dense materials that I have, couches, books, dirt, sandbags, if you have old cinder blocks laying around, any kind of lumber. And I'm just going to build this whole area up, and I'm going to make myself like a giant like igloo, if you could imagine, or like a giant wall here, and I'm going to want to leave a little breathing hole so I can breathe, so that's what you're going to want to do. You're going to want to make it as dense as possible with as much dense material. So just hang on a second, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the halving thicknesses that you need to know. And if you want to pause the video so this way you can write it down. So I'll show you what you need to know. So this is what your ideal scenario is here. All right, you're going to want 4 inches of lead. You're going to want 10 inches of steel, 2 feet of concrete, 3 feet of packed dirt, 6 feet of water, or 9 feet of wood. And if you do a Google search online, you may be able to, I think they did a calculation for the amount of books that would reduce it to 1/1000th. So check that out. See if you could find the books. You should be able to find it. And then this is the halving thicknesses here. So as you see, 1 halving thickness, so 1/2 inch of lead will reduce radiation by half. 1 inch of steel reduces it by half. 2.4 inches of concrete reduces it by half. 3.6 inches of dirt reduces it by half. So even if you can't get to like the 3 foot mark, like this is your ideal scenario. Your 3 feet of dirt, your 2 feet of concrete, your 9 feet of wood. This is your ideal scenario. This is what's going to reduce the radiation to 1/1000th. But even if you can't get to that level, if you could still get to some of these, this is the halving thickness. If you can get like 2 or 3 halving thicknesses, so let's say if you could get like, 6 inches of concrete, or maybe, let's say 8 inches of concrete, or, 12 inches of soil, or 21 inches of water, or 33 inches of wood, that's going to be very good. If you can get at least 2 to 3 halving thicknesses, maybe 4 or 5, that's very good. That's what you're going to want to do. But ideally, you're going to want to get to these numbers here. You're going to want to get to that. And then air, I forgot to mention air. 6,000 inches of air will reduce the radiation by half. So I don't know. I would have to do my math there. I don't know how many feet that would be. So this is it, guys. In the next video, I'm going to talk about gear, everyday carry gear that you're going to want to carry with you in your purse, or in your pockets, or in your get home bag, or your bag that you take to work, your briefcase. If you have like a briefcase or something like that, you're going to want to carry a few items with you, so this way, when something happens, you're going to be in good shape. You're not going to so you're going to want to have some small items with you or nearby, or at least at your house you're going to want them. So I'm going to go over that and see what else. Anything else? I don't think so. So I'll see you in the next part. You can click on the bottom of the screen and it'll take you there. So thanks for watching. If you liked the video, subscribe. Please comment. I like reading your comments. Press like, press the thumbs up button, and I'll see you in the next part.